Okay, we're going to start discussing rhetoric, and this is, as I understand it, foundations of rhetoric. So we're going to just start at the beginning with this, what it is we're studying, so we know that first of all, and what its purpose is, and then what we hope we can learn and accomplish with rhetoric. So that's where we want to start here. For this lesson, I want you to read Fitting Words, the preface and the introduction for it. Okay? And do you have the workbook?
No.
Okay. So the how to use the book is interesting. That's the preface. And it will give you really some different sources, foundational concepts, and that's the biggest thing. That's the most important thing. And then the goal and purpose of the book is in the introduction. So they're both very short reading assignments. One of the most important things in here in the preface is the outline on page 2. And that outline is going to lay out for you really the structure of a course in rhetoric. So in this outline, we're looking at how it all fits together. So if you'll notice, after we give the definition of rhetoric, and this is also the structure of the book. The book is structured this way because when you're learning rhetoric, this is what you want to learn. Okay, so we have the 5 faculties of oratory, or the 5, what we refer to sometimes as the 5 canons of rhetoric: invention, arrangement, style, memory, delivery. Okay. Invention is A. In most rhetoric courses, 70 to 75% of the course is taken up with invention. Then you have arrangement, and under arrangement are the 6 parts of discourse: introduction, narration, division, confirmation, refutation, and conclusion. That speaks to the way that you divide any piece of discourse, whether it's spoken or written. You're going to follow the 6 parts of discourse there. So you have those 6 parts under arrangement, which is the second canon of rhetoric. Now, let me back up and say under invention, we study a lot of different things. We study under invention ethos, pathos, logos. Ethos, pathos, and logos are also considered to be modes of persuasion, but they are usually taught under invention because as you're composing a piece of discourse, you are considering ethos. What do I need to say that enhances my ethos, that makes me credible to my audience? All right? Pathos is putting the audience in the proper frame of mind, the right frame of mind. Okay, so that would also be under invention because you're looking at your audience and you're thinking, okay, in order to persuade them, what frame of mind do I need to put them in? Okay, so that would also be part of invention. And logos, of course, is the logical arguments or proofs that you use to build your case. Now, logos is the main thing. It's the main arguments that you use. Under logos, you have general and special lines of argument. General lines of argument would be where you study logic itself. You study, what makes an argument. You study syllogisms and enthymemes, and the structure of argument itself, and so that you can take the arguments that you need to make for your case and put them in a right form, so that you're not using fallacies, fallacious arguments, so that you're using strong arguments that, under logic, I should say, logic, you're studying inductive and deductive reasoning. In rhetoric, we look a lot more at inductive reasoning because we argue a lot more with inductive reasoning than we do with deductive reasoning.
Yeah.
But still, deductive reasoning is the foundation for your arguments. Aristotle said that, let me see if I can remember how he said it, that men are moved more by examples. So inductive argument is an example.
Okay.
So they're moved by that, but they're persuaded by deductive argument. Okay? So the three modes of persuasion, ethos, pathos, logos, and I have always joked about the fourth mode of persuasion. Remember what that is? Bogus.
Yeah.
The bogus argument. Okay, so those are all under invention. Also, I said logos includes general and special line of argument. So the special line of argument would be political oratory, forensic oratory, and ceremonial oratory. And then also the fourth that we've talked about, that is a fourth kind of argument that really a lot of what we see today is inspired by or is patterned after. Political speeches today, when you listen to a stump speech or you listen to a State of the Union address or something like that, they take on the form of this. It doesn't really fit with political, forensic, or ceremonial. It's kind of a mashing of the three together. Do you remember what that is?
No.
Preaching and teaching. So preaching and teaching isn't especially political, because political oratory, you're trying to persuade someone to do something. There are elements of political oratory in preaching, right?
Yes.
Forensic oratory, do you remember what that deals with?
Courts of law, usually.
Yeah, it deals with past actions, and it's inviting you to make a judgment about past actions. All right, so is there an element of that in preaching?
Yes.
How so?
Because we're looking at the Bible, which was written in the past, and events that happened in the Bible.
Yes. You also are, in preaching, you're invited to examine your past actions.
Yes.
To see whether they were right or not, right? So in preaching, we're asking you to evaluate your past, right?
Yes.
And to make a decision for the future. And then also you have ceremonial oratory. Ceremonial oratory deals with the present, but really just to honor something. It holds up something, a virtue, a person, and asks you either to honor it or dishonor it, to disparage it, or to speak well of it, to praise it. Okay? Praise or censure.
That's ceremonial, right?
Right. Yeah. And that would also be a form of, or it would appear in preaching as well. Because in preaching, if you're preaching the gospel, you're not just encouraging someone to believe it and embrace it, but you're also honoring the gospel. You're praising the gospel. You often preaching, you're praising God. You may be holding up a virtue to your church, the congregation, and urging them to embrace this. Okay? So hopefully you see what I mean on this. That preaching is the fourth kind. But going back to logic, logos deals with the proofs or apparent proofs that you use to make your case. What you build your case out of. The arguments, the actual arguments that you build your case out of. There are general and special lines of argument. So general lines of argument are just enthymemes, syllogisms, Inductive argument, which is examples, different kinds, analogies, that sort of thing. And deductive arguments, which are syllogisms, enthymemes, and structured arguments or proofs. That we believe that where you would say, for instance, the Bible is the Word of God because God gave it, or in it God revealed Himself. Okay, that's a logical argument. But that fits under general lines of argument. And then special lines of argument would be political, forensic, ceremonial, and preaching and teaching. Okay?
Okay, so those three go under special.
Yeah. Yeah, that's correct. Okay, so that's invention. Then you have arrangement, which is the 6 parts of discourse. Then you have style.
Yes, okay.
Style would include the figures of speech and thought. It's more than that. You consider ethos, and pathos, and logos with style. More so ethos and pathos. What you're trying to do, what kind of distance you're trying to create with your audience. How familiar do you want to sound to your audience? Do you want to sound like a textbook? Do you want to deliver a scientific lecture that will be accepted after peer review? Or are you speaking on a more casual level? Preaching and teaching should not sound like a textbook in general, because you're trying to move your audience to something. Textbooks don't typically do that. They may move you, but it may move you to hurry and get done with the lesson, right?
Yes.
So that's all part of style. So that's where we consider the effects of first person and second person and third person, and what size words we use, and whether we're intentionally trashing somebody or honoring them or something like that. That's style. Then memory. Memory is the 4th of the 5 canons or faculties of rhetoric. All right, and memory, of course, deals with the way that you're going to remember what you're saying. Okay? Now, when I'm preaching, I use notes. I'll have 10 pages, 12 pages. Last night I had 17 pages of notes. I didn't finish the message last night. I stopped. Mercy rule. But memory, that's one way of remembering, is to have notes. Okay, right now I'm not speaking with notes. I have this in front of me and I'm using it as a guide. Okay, so I'm drawing from the memory of many times teaching through this, all right, and understanding of the material. Sometimes you're asked to give an impromptu speech. Sometimes you are going to speak and you're going to do it without notes at all, okay? When that's the case, then the right thing for you to do, well, there's still some way that you're going to remember what you wanted to say. So some way in your mind you're going to structure it so that you can remember everything. Now you might forget a thing or two, but you want to be able to have a fluid speech. Okay, so there are different devices that you use for memory. And then the 5th canon of rhetoric, the 5 faculties of oratory, as this outline calls it, but it's the 5 canons. The 5th canon is delivery. Now, we spend the least amount of time teaching on delivery in rhetoric. But in a good rhetoric course, you're getting a lot of practice at delivery. When we consider delivery, because it's rhetoric, we are considering both spoken and written discourse. The delivery is different in both. There are things, for instance, nobody cares how you spelled it in your notes if you're speaking, right?
Yes.
And when you're speaking, no one notices whether you can spell or not because they don't know how you're spelling anything. They're listening to your pronunciation. If you don't pronounce your words correctly or you pronounce them like a bumpkin, then that's how you sound to your audience. In the spoken word, it's much more important that your sentences be structured properly by good rules of grammar, that your spelling be correct, and that sort of thing. So that's a part of the delivery on that. And that's a reason why in the written word, you need to be more careful about spelling than in the spoken word. Okay? In the spoken word, you can get away with bad grammar, you can get away with contractions and things like that, depending on the formality of the occasion and your speaking. Because if you want to be more familiar to your audience and reduce the distance, then use contractions, use slang. Don't be very formal in the structure of your sentence. Okay? But if you're speaking to people, if you're addressing a convention of English teachers, you better make sure that you have good grammar, even in your speaking. Okay? So those are the 5 faculties. So you notice the outline again, the key concepts. First, the definition. Second, the 5 faculties. Thirdly, the modes of persuasion, which we already pointed out, are primarily taught under invention. And then under logos, you see the special lines of argument and the general lines of argument.
Yes.
Okay? So there's an outline of the course. Now, we want to start out by asking, what is rhetoric? What is rhetoric? What do you understand rhetoric to mean? When you hear the word rhetoric, what comes to mind? Now, obviously for you, it's different because you were taught rhetoric even in high school. But to others, when they say rhetoric, have you heard rhetoric used in a negative sense? Okay, how so?
People think it's just, and people will say it's just a bunch of rhetoric if it's something that just sounds good without any backing.
Yeah. So a lot of times the way people think of rhetoric is that it's empty words, or that you're trying to manipulate your audience, or manipulate people with words. They treat it like it's just semantics. Have you heard somebody say that? It's just semantics. It's just, like you're twisting words, or you're twisting my words. You're trying to use trickery, like a used car salesman, which probably they get a bad rap, but there are some that have been pretty poor through the years. All right? So what is your impression of rhetoric?
My view of rhetoric?
Huh?
It's
Do you have a good impression of it or a bad impression of it?
a good impression.
Okay. So in what sense? What gave you a bad impression? A good impression of it?
The teaching.
Okay.
And seeing how it's used throughout the Bible.
Yeah.
And also how we use it all the time in our lives.
Yeah.
The proper use of rhetoric.
Have you seen rhetoric used badly?
I've seen myself use it badly. But not on purpose.
Yeah. Have you seen or heard people where you listened to them and you thought, yes, you're twisting everything there? Yeah. Where are you most likely to hear rhetoric abused?
You hear a lot in just normal discussions, but also you can hear a lot. Sounds bad, but you can hear a lot in preaching too.
Yeah, where people are trying to move you a certain way, but they're abusing you.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Or just slaughtering rhetoric in general.
Yeah. Yes. You hear guys, they're like bullies in the pulpit. They're not preaching the word of God and compelling your conscience, binding your conscience so much as they are trying to manipulate your conscience. And there is a difference between binding the conscience and manipulating the conscience. Okay, so there's one. I would say the two places where I hear rhetoric abused the most are by politicians who you're listening to them and it's obvious. I was listening to Governor Wolf in Pennsylvania defend the fact that he had shut down all small businesses and churches in Pennsylvania, and then he joined with the protesters in Harrisburg and in Philadelphia. He marched with them. No social distancing. And I was listening to that and the questions that they were asking, where he would take every question and turn it and not answer the question, but answer something else that was more of a promo for himself.
Part of his agenda.
Yeah. And that's an abuse of rhetoric right there. Okay. The other place I hear rhetoric abused often is the news media, where you can hear it in the way they present it. For instance, recently, the officers that shot the man in Atlanta at the Wendy's, all right, and the way that the story is told there, where it's presented as if they shot him in the back. Well, that's a partial truth. It's not the full truth. They didn't give all the facts. They give part of it. And then, of course, the way that they say it, different adjectives that people use so that you know their opinion of things. Rhetoric is used badly, rhetoric being abused.
Now, I don't know if this is the same for everyone, but I find it more annoying when I hear conservatives do that than I do when I hear Democrats. And I think that's mainly because I almost expect it of Democrats, but I expect more.
Yeah. Yeah, we want our side to argue justly,
Yes.
rightly. Where we know the other side, they're going to lie, they're going to cheat, but we don't want to be that way.
Yeah.
And we don't want our side to be like that. Yeah, because we see a right and a wrong in this. So, and that's really what this is about. Where rhetoric gets a bad rap is when people abuse it, when people are arguing unjustly. They're trying to bind your conscience, but they're doing it in a wrong way. They're going about it in a sinful way, through lies, through manipulation, that kind of thing, through flattery, through slander, all that sort of thing that people will do. But we want our arguments to be just and right and not manipulating, but speaking the truth in love, as the Bible would say it. So Aristotle offered a definition of rhetoric. There are three definitions that we look at in class, and then the book will give you a definition. Fitting Words gives a really solid definition of rhetoric. Aristotle defined rhetoric as the faculty of observing in any given case the available means of persuasion. There are some faults with his definition. Aristotle was trying to avoid some of the charges that Socrates made against some of the criticisms that Socrates leveled against rhetoric. In the Gorgias, Socrates essentially said that rhetoric is a form of flattery. It's deceit. He said it's imitation of the true art, which he considered the true art to be, dialectic.
Dialectic, yeah.
Yeah. Right. So logic. He considered logic. But of course, logic has to be presented. So Socrates was wrong about that. Because if the fact that you have logic still to persuade people, you have to use rhetoric. So your logic is no good if you're not applying it to the situation, which you apply it through rhetoric. And Aristotle, rightly so, Aristotle said that rhetoric is the counterpart of dialectic. He pointed out that dialectic is of no use without rhetoric. So the fault in his definition is he defined rhetoric as the faculty of observing in any given case the available means of persuasion. Okay, so let me ask you a question. If you observe the available means of persuasion, have you necessarily used rhetoric?
No.
Of course not. Because what are you doing right now?
I'm observing you.
Yeah, that's right. You're observing, you're learning, and in the course of this study, you will be observing more the available means of persuasion. But that's not the same thing as using those available means of persuasion. Rhetoric is using the available means of persuasion. Rhetoric requires the practice, the use, the application of the principles. So the rhetoric course would be incomplete unless you are learning to present yourself and present truth in a winsome fashion, right?
Yes.
Okay. So that's Aristotle's definition. It avoided some of Socrates' charges. We're going to ask something?
Yes. Do you? I almost have a problem with the available means of persuasion as well, because the available means of persuasion in some senses could mean a slutty woman.
Yeah, that's exactly right. That's exactly right. So you may notice, for instance, a baseball bat can be an available means of persuasion. A slutty woman could be as well. Commercials do it all the time today. It's available to you, so you use it. So it's more than just a faculty of observing. What Aristotle defined here is really a good definition of invention, which is the first canon of rhetoric. But it's not rhetoric. It's the first of 5 canons. Rhetoric is not complete until the delivery. You've got to get to that. So there also has to be the arrangement, the style, the memory, and then the delivery. Okay? Now, the bulk of what we study in rhetoric is invention. So Aristotle gave a good definition of most of what we study.
And that's what he did was, if you read Aristotle, he was invention all over.
Right. Almost nothing written on memory or delivery.
No.
And very little on style.
Yeah.
He did speak about arrangement, but not much. Most of his book, probably 90% of his 3 books on rhetoric,
Just invention.
are just invention. Yeah, that's correct. Okay, then Quintilian defined rhetoric as the art of a good man speaking well. The art of a good man speaking well. Compared to Aristotle's definition, how would you rank Quintilian's?
As less.
Less?
I think it's less.
Okay, why?
Because he says it's the art of a good man speaking well, but a good man can use sophistry just as well as a bad man. And so I think he takes a step back from where Aristotle went. Because Quintilian's not asking him to observe anything.
Right.
He just wants him to sound good. So
Well, the speaking well, though, would eliminate sophistry. Because if it's a good man using sophistry, he's not speaking well. He is, of course, speaking relying on the moral code of his day. But he's the definition, if we apply a Christian definition, what is a good man? It would have to be a moral man, a godly man, right?
yeah.
And speaking well, what would that be? Well, it certainly wouldn't be persuading everyone to just go along with you so you get your way.
But a clear presentation.
Yes. Yeah. In the Rhetoric Companion, Wilson offers this definition. Nate Wilson primarily wrote this. And he offers this definition. Let's see. is it? Oh, yeah, here it is. A godly man speaking well in his attempt to persuade others to believe and act in accordance with biblical wisdom. All right, so that's a good, solid definition of rhetoric right there. And it takes Quintilian's definition and applies scriptural standards to it. Okay?
Okay.
Now, Douglas Wilson, in his it's taken from Repairing the Ruins, I believe. I probably have the book over there, but maybe I have it over here. But his book, I think it's called Repairing the Ruins. It's a series of essays on different parts of classical education. And Douglas Wilson, in his chapter on rhetoric, gives this definition: the art of speaking clearly and effectively. The art of speaking clearly and effectively. Quintilian's definition puts more emphasis on the rhetor, the good man speaking well. Wilson's definition puts more emphasis on the speaking or writing, the discourse. Okay? So the art of speaking clearly and effectively. It's a simple definition. But it's a helpful definition too, I think, with that. Okay, now let's look in here and see the definition that is offered in the book. Let's see. Okay. It would be, I think, in chapter 1. I should know, but I don't. Okay, he offers a really broad definition to begin with.
The art of persuasive speaking and writing.
Yeah. The art of effective communication. He points out that's too broad because a bully harassing a youth or a pretty woman winking at a man can be effective communication. Then he offers a better definition: the art of effective verbal communication. All right, but again, he points out a